Now, when it comes to sexually transmitted infections, most people are drowning in anxiety. And despite everything they've been taught, which caused their anxiety, they still know virtually nothing on how to actually protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections, besides use protection, which is outdated and impractical advice for reasons that I'm going to get into in just a minute. And look, the people who taught you that mean well, they really do. But odds are they haven't had that much sex, and they certainly don't know a lot about sexually transmitted infections. They've definitely not looked at thousands of STI test results like I have. I own a company that tests people for sexually transmitted infections. So today, I'm going to show you a brand new way to look at this, a practical checklist, if you will, of knowledge that you need to protect yourself from STI. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing we're going to talk about is that STDs are not the huge deal that you have been led to believe that they are. And I know that sounds funny coming from a guy that runs a company that tests for STDs. But let's talk about it, okay? I know you're thinking about HIV. We're going to get to HIV in a few minutes. Don't worry about HIV right now. We're going to have a whole conversation about that. But first, let's talk about the things you are much more likely to contract, like gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis. We'll throw syphilis in there as well, mycoplasma genitalium, and trichomonas, okay? These are all bacterial infections with the exception of trichomonas. Trichomonas is a parasite, actually, but all of them are easily 100% curable 100% of the time. And when you take them out of the STD category, what are they? With the exception of trichomonas, they're a bacterial infection that you caught from another human being. It's no different than when you've no doubt contracted strep throat or any number of bacterial infections you've had in your life. You've all had dozens of them, every single one of them you contracted from another human being. Contracting these things simply because you had sex with someone does not make them any worse. They're not any harder to cure. And when you take the stigma away from it, you'll realize it's really not a big deal whatsoever. It's the sort of thing that you should be tested for so that you can get them treated when you have them and so you're not spreading them. But take away the stigma, what are you left with? A simple bacterial infection that's easily curable. Now, the second thing is that most of you have never been STD or STI. It's the same thing, checked properly in your life. I don't care how many times you've went to the doctor and asked for a full panel. Doctors, generally speaking, are not prepared to do this properly. Like, let's talk about the biggest red flag, which is when it comes to gonorrhea and chlamydia. Those are site-specific bacterial infections, meaning you can have them in your throat if you have oral sex. You can have them in your genitals. You can have it in your anus. You can have it anywhere that you have sexual contact. But testing one location does not test the other. So if during your last STD check, you had a genital swab or a urine test, no throat swab test, there is no doubt about it. You were completely failed and you were not tested properly, and you have no idea if you have gonorrhea or chlamydia. It's that simple. There have been 3 studies so far in 2025 that I have seen, all showing that people are more likely to have oral gonorrhea than genital gonorrhea. And we've seen that in our own practice where 80%, 8 out of 10, 80 out of 100 gonorrhea cases were oral positive and negative in their genitals. I know that sounds unbelievable, but if you go to a clinic or a doctor or a telemedicine company that doesn't test your throat, then you're not getting STI tested properly, and you don't know if you have these super common bacterial infections that you're then passing along to other people. 2 other red flags. One is mycoplasma genitalium, which is a little bacterium, definitely a sexually transmitted infection, rarely tested for, but extraordinarily common. That comes up positive on our testing panel continuously. So if you weren't tested for mycoplasma genitalium, you weren't tested properly. Trichomonas. Odds are that not a single person watching this video will have ever been tested for trichomonas. That's how uncommon the test is, yet it is the single most common curable STI in the United States. Guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you go to the doctor and say, I've been sleeping around, test me for everything, or I want a full panel, God only knows what you're going to be tested for, but it's not going to be anything approaching what I would consider to be a full panel. So these are your red flags. Red flags are lack of throat swabs, lack of mycoplasma genitalium, and lack of trichomonas testing. If your last test didn't include those, then the entire thing is nonsensical and you need to look elsewhere. Now, the third thing is that HIV is real and it's a real threat, but not for most of you, realistically speaking. Let's talk about this, okay? The per transmission risk of HIV for penis and vaginal sex, this is unprotected, no condoms, okay? And somebody has untreated HIV, somebody else has sex with that person. Again, no condom. That's a exposure. The per exposure risk per the CDC is 4 in 10,000 if you're the penis haver like me, and 8 in 10,000 if you have a vagina, if you're receiving the penis in that case. And that is hundreds of times lower than most people think. Theoretically, if you have penis and vaginal sex, you could have sex with HIV positive people for years, and it would still be more probable than not that you would not contract HIV. Now, for you guys out there that are like, whoa, you shouldn't tell people this, it's going to lead to risky behavior. Look, here's the thing. Most people are drowning in HIV anxiety, and it really screws them up. Let me talk about that for a minute. If you consider HIV to be your primary focus, even though your actual risk is very, very low, then that's going to make you look at STI testing in a really wacky way. Like, I can't tell you how many people have a sexual exposure that they later regret. Maybe they met somebody at the bar, party, whatever, right? They Google HIV early detection. They spend an obscene amount of money, hundreds of dollars, on an STI panel that has HIV early detection because they're panicking about HIV. But that same panel every single time lacks throat swabs, lacks mycoplasma genitalium, lacks trichomonas. It's not a complete panel at all. It scratches their anxiety itch that they have about HIV, but their HIV risk might have been extraordinarily low to begin with. So by all means, get HIV tested, but not at the expense of getting tested for these other STIs, which you're much more likely to have. And in a weird twist of science or irony, however you prefer to look at it, having a bacterial infection like a chlamydia, like a gonorrhea, like a mycoplasma genitalium, of which, like I've said multiple times, you've probably never once been tested for in your life, changes that HIV risk. It almost triples it, more than doubles it, and in fact, almost triples it. Still low, but it does increase it. So you can see how by hyper-focusing on HIV, not worrying about what else is on those testing panels, in a weird twist of, like I said, science or irony, it actually increases your HIV risk. So what is a higher HIV risk? Anal sex is much higher than vaginal sex. I think most people realize that at this point, but overall your risk is still lower than most people think. And if you do engage in high-risk sexual activities, then definitely consider PrEP. PrEP has been given an A rating by the United States Preventative Services Task Force. That means that you can get it 100% for free if you have insurance, not even a copay, including the quarterly testing that comes with it. So if you're a person that has unprotected anal sex, or you are like, I get it, Robert, my risk of HIV might be very low. However, I want it to be zero, then by all means, PrEP is available to you. Virtually any physician has been educated on PrEP and can prescribe that for you at no cost to you. Now, don't worry, I'm still going to get to the condom part at the end. I'm not telling you not to use a condom. We're going to get to it. I'm going to tell you exactly why when sex educators say use a condom as the way to protect yourself from STIs, that they're failing you in a lot of ways. We're going to get to that. Right now, we're going to talk about vaccinations because hepatitis B is 50 to 100 times more infectious than HIV. So we talked about your HIV risk for a lot of people not being as high as you might have assumed. For most people, that hepatitis B transmission rate is higher than they would have assumed. The good news is that if you're young and live in the United States, odds are you've already been vaccinated for hepatitis B. I was vaccinated for hepatitis B in college because I was taking biomedical science classes. I was working with blood from time to time. That's when I was vaccinated. A lot of you have already been vaccinated. If you haven't been vaccinated for hepatitis B, you may want to consider that. It's one less STI that you would then need to worry about, okay? The other vaccination that I think you absolutely need to consider is the HPV vaccine, human papillomavirus. HPV is a virus that has about 200 strains or so. Most of them are harmless so far as science knows right now. A few are harmful so far as science knows right now, and they can cause things like cervical cancer, oropharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma. That's the oral throat cancer, essentially. It can cause a lot of negative things, deadly things even. Going back to HIV, I know so many people hyper-focused on HIV haven't even gotten vaccinated for HPV. Insane. Because their HIV risk for a lot of those people is practically zero, your HPV risk is basically 100%. Shocking, I know. But that's right out of the CDC's own mouth. It says everybody that's sexually active is going to be exposed to one or more strains of HPV in their lifetime. And yes, that's absolutely true. It is essentially unavoidable. I've heard it called the common cold of the sex world. I've heard it called the glitter of the sex world. It can spread through skin-to-skin contact. So even things like condoms don't offer a tremendous amount of protection. It's also site-specific. And there's no testing for men. Women are often tested during their pap smear. Not always, but often. Yet, did you know that HPV can be in your throat? And if that woman tests negative in her cervix, but has it in her throat, she's just going to be told that she's negative for HPV. And there's no testing for men at all. So you just need to go into your sexual life with the understanding that you're not only going to get HPV, you're going to get multiple strains of HPV, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it, except this gift from the science gods called the HPV vaccine, which has been extraordinarily effective. I mean, one of the biggest advancements in medicine in recent history. Cervical cancer rates are plummeting. I saw some research the other day from the Albert Einstein School of Medicine. I kid you not. I thought that was a great name. I never actually heard of that school before, but what a beautiful name. That said that the vaccine has been so effective that herd immunity is even something that's a possibility, and that these more dangerous strains are actually reducing in young people, even young people who haven't been vaccinated. But you should certainly consider vaccines for Hep B and HPV. Two less things you really got to worry about. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is herpes simplex virus. And this is also one that is very hard to avoid because, again, it can spread from skin to skin contact. So, again, this whole thing of use condoms, protect yourself from STIs. Yeah, for some of them, yes. In certain circumstances, absolutely. This is one of those that if the person has sores or if they're shedding the virus in an area not covered by the condom, or if you're like most people and you're having unprotected oral sex, then you're going to be at high risk of herpes simplex virus. Now, the problem here is that most people don't even know that they have herpes simplex virus, and testing isn't a tremendous amount of help. I'll spare you the details, but there are some real fundamental issues with asymptomatic testing for herpes simplex virus. But did you know that when people have cold sores, that's actually a type of herpes, and that type of herpes can be spread both to the other person's mouth or to their genitals? So I find that instead of asking people questions like, are you clean? Why, yes, I'm clean. Oh, okay, let's go make love out in the desert or whatever. Sorry. Instead of asking people stupid questions like, are you clean? Ask specific questions, right? So I might ask people, have you ever been throat swab tested for gonorrhea, right? You might ask people questions like, have you ever had a herpes outbreak? No? Okay. What about cold sores, right? Because most people don't even know that their cold sores are herpes. So when you ask them a specific question like that, you might get a better sense of if they have this infection or not. And if they do, hey, great news. There's wonderful antiviral medications they can take that can lower your risk by having them lower their risk of shedding the virus. So not all is lost, but I think we need to ask better questions, and we can only do that when we understand more about things like herpes simplex virus. Now we have one more, but I'm going to go ahead and get to this condom issue, okay? The problem with public health officials saying, use protection, protect yourself from S. Raise your hand out there on the internet land if you've ever heard somebody say, use protection, protect yourself from STIs. There's several problems with that. One is that it's just overly simplistic, right? It's overly simplistic messaging. For example, most people have unprotected oral sex. I didn't say what people should have. I'm not suggesting what people should or shouldn't do. I'm saying what people do. And most people do have unprotected oral sex. How do I know? Well, I've seen survey results saying that about 94% of people have unprotected oral sex. I also have eyes, and I can go to a place like Walgreens or the grocery store or anywhere that sells condoms, and I've never once, not one time, seen a dental dam. And that alone tells me that most people have unprotected oral sex. It's just an understood fact of life. Unprotected oral sex can spread syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, you catching on? HSV, and HPV. So that is the primary reason why I say this adage of use a condom, protect yourself from STIs. There's nothing wrong with that messaging. And obviously condoms do lower your risk. But virtually everybody in the United States has unprotected oral sex and then puts on a condom after 20 minutes of oral sex and thinks that they're protecting themselves from STIs. And that's just not true. And that's why we need to start avoiding oversimplistic messages where we're trying to inform people, but we're actually misinforming them. Because the whole reason why people call condoms protection in the first place is because they think they're protecting them from STIs. They do in many ways, and they don't in other ways for reasons that we just talked about. Now, the last thing that you can do is something called DoxyPEP. And DoxyPEP is the antibiotic doxycycline. It's been around for decades now. I actually just had a mole cut off my face, and the plastic surgeon prescribed me doxycycline so that I wouldn't get acne while it was healing. So doxycycline's been around for a long time. It's been used for a lot of different things. But if you get it prescribed in the protocol called DoxyPEP for post-exposure prophylaxis, and you take 200 milligrams within 72 hours of unprotected sex, including unprotected oral sex, remember, it pretty dramatically lessens your likelihood of contracting gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. For chlamydia and syphilis, it's a home run. It's like 85, 88%, something like that, depending upon the clinical trial. For gonorrhea, it's closer to 50%. Because there are strains of gonorrhea that are resistant to doxycycline and have been for 40 years. It has nothing to do with the DoxyPEP protocol. That horse left the barn 40 years ago in terms of gonorrhea becoming resistant to doxycycline. But it is the best thing that you can do if you're one of these people that has unprotected oral sex to protect yourself from gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And it's very inexpensive. You can get it from shamelesscare.com. If you need it in an emergency situation, we can typically get you a prescription. You can go pick it up at your local pharmacy within an hour or two. But you have to take it within 72 hours. So if you're sitting here like a week after an exposure or something like that, you may want to get it anyway, just have it next time, but it's not going to help you for the time previous. So those are practical tips as a guy who looks at STI test results all day, every day, okay? People rarely find out they get HIV. It happens, but rarely. They rarely find out they get something like syphilis, although syphilis is easily curable in 2025. What people often get, what I am definitely not surprised of when I see the test results, are oral gonorrhea, mycoplasma genitalium, and trichomonas. Those are the 3 things that you are not terribly unlikely to contract in your lifetime. But the good news is that they're easily curable bacterial infections, like I talked about earlier. Drop us a like if you learned anything. Drop a comment if you learned more than you did in your sexual education class in school. I'm Robert from Shameless Care. We'll talk soon.